Hello my dear friends and welcome to StudyIQ. I am Joycey Joy and today in this lecture we will discuss about the transgender community in India and inclusive democracy. Here in this lecture we will see what is the status of transgender community in India with regard to their social and economic welfare, and we will also see what is the history. We will see what happened after the British came into India. How did it influence or impact their socio-economic status in India? What are the current issues or problems? What measures have been taken? But what are the challenges in these measures taken and what is the way ahead? So we will discuss all this in this lecture. First of all, let us understand what is the current affair. Going by numbers, there are 4,90,000 transgenders in India in the year 2011. But even though they are in large numbers, they are the most visibly invisible population in the country. There were many measures in the past years taken by the government, by different stakeholders, by the Supreme Court, etc. in order to solve the issues related to the transgenders. But it is seen that these issues are not solved and they are vulnerable to marginalization in the society. So this makes the current affair, and in this context, we will have a in-depth analysis of the issues of transgenders in India. But before we go to the issues of the transgenders, let us understand what is the history. How did this marginalization and vulnerability of the transgenders happen? For that, let us first understand the history. Historically, Indian society has been very tolerant to the diverse sexual identities and sexual behaviors. That means in the past, Indian society was tolerant to this diverse sexual identities like the transgenders. The transgenders are also known as the Hijra community. So the Hijra community evolved to form a unique subculture within the ancient Indian society. That means the ancient Indians accepted Hijra community in their society. This Hijra community existed alongside the omnipresent heterosexual unit of the family. So they were a part of the family system in the society in the ancient and the medieval times. They also had cultural and social significance in the society or across the country. They were discussed in the avatars. We will also see that the ancient Indian mythology and also the ancient literature of India talks about the existence of Hijra community or the transgender community. For example, if we look at the Kama Sutra or epics like Mahabharata, transgenders has been discussed or elaborated. And we will also see that in all this ancient mythology and literature, the transgender community has been portrayed with dignity and respect. They were not marginalized, they were not vulnerable. They had given a dignified and respectful position. So this is about the ancient and medieval India. But now what happened after this? Thereafter, the British came to India, and the British had strict Victorian conceptions of appropriate sexual behavior. So British believed in appropriate sexual behavior, and under the colonial law, the formerly acceptable sexual behaviors and identities like the transgenders became criminalized. A very good example is the section 377 of the IPC. Recently, Supreme Court has struck down the section 377, but we will come to the details of it later in this lecture itself. But understand that it was in the colonial law or the British rule period that the transgenders lost their dignity and respect in the society. Such sexual behaviors and identities became criminalized in the colonial law. Now, in the late 19th century, this led to the transgender persons losing the socio-cultural position that they had enjoyed. Now at present, the present status is that now they are increasingly recognized as one of the most socio-economically marginalized section of the society. So this is how the present status of the transgenders has evolved in India. Now let us discuss about the vulnerability of the transgender community in India. They are highly marginalized and vulnerable. Despite of the laws, policies and their implementation, the transgender community in India is identified as one of the most vulnerable and marginalized community in India. They are isolated from the society. Now talking about the family, most often children who does not conform to the gender are forced to leave their families at an early childhood age itself. So what happens? In case of the transgenders, they are forced to leave their families at an early childhood. Family structure or Indian families are not ready to accept transgenders as a part of their family. So this will result in the transgenders leaving the family at a very young age itself. So they will leave the family in order to find individuals of their kind. That means transgenders will find other transgenders. So they live in a community where they have contact with the transgenders. That means they are marginalized from the family structure of the Indian society. They are highly marginalized, and ultimately what will happen? They will be vulnerable to abuse. When they leave the families at a younger age, the factors like social protection, means of living, education, etc. are neglected for them. So this will result into social abuse for this community. They also face extreme forms of exclusion from basic dignity and human rights because they are not respected or their rights are not protected in the society. So we can say they face extreme forms of exclusion from basic dignity and also human rights. They are also vulnerable to gender-based violence. They are forced to beg or to dance or to sell their sex. They are also highly vulnerable to fatal diseases. Fatal diseases means those diseases that can lead to the death of a person. So they are highly vulnerable to such kind of fatal diseases. For example, HIV/AIDS. They also live in extremely poor conditions or their working conditions are very poor. For example, prostitution. There is also higher prevalence of HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis and other sexually transmitted diseases among these transgenders. And according to the recent UN AIDS report, HIV prevalence among the transgenders is 3.1% in 2017. This is the second highest among all communities in the country. And here another important fact is that only around 60% of them are aware that they are infected. That means they does not even have an awareness of the disease by which they are infected. Another major issue is the high instances of substance abuse and low levels of literacy. So all these factors make the transgender community highly vulnerable and marginalized in the Indian society. Now let us understand what are the measures taken and what are the challenges associated with these measures. The first one is under education. The higher education institutions in the country provide a quota and give special consideration to the transgender people. But what is the challenge here? Only a few utilize these provisions. What is the reason? We have already seen that they are left out from the families at a younger age. So they do not complete their basic school education even. So without completing the basic school education, how will they enroll themselves in higher education? So that is a practical difficulty. And also the schools are largely unequipped to handle children with alternate sexual identities. So even though there is a provision that provides quota and reservation for transgenders in the higher education institutions, they go practically unused. Now, second one, coming to the voting. There are two options available in the registration forms. They have to declare themselves as female or male. And this provision was amended by the Election Commission in 2009. But even after the amendment, we will see that most of the transgenders do not get themselves registered. The major reason is their isolation and marginalization from the society. Now coming to the Supreme Court. In the year 2014, in Nalsa versus Government of India or Union of India, Supreme Court recognized transgenders as the third gender. And in Nalsa versus Union of India, the Supreme Court also observed that the recognition of transgenders is a human rights issue. And recently in 2018, we have seen recently that the Supreme Court has struck down Section 377 of the IPC. Now coming to the health sector, the HIV services for the transgender community are rapidly improving in a targeted manner. And this is happening after the Supreme Court verdict on a large volume. Let us take for example, NACO, that is National AIDS Control Organization, reported that there are 240,000 hijras who were provided with HIV prevention and treatment services in 2015. In 2014, it was only 1,80,000. So in 2015, it became 2,40,000. That means there is a significant improvement in 1 year. And this is after the Supreme Court verdict in 2014 in the Nalsa versus Union of India judgment that transgenders are identified as a third gender. Now coming to the legislations or the law. The Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill 2016 has been passed in the Rajya Sabha. When we discussed about the Private Members Bill, we have learned that this bill was introduced by a private member, and we have seen what are the challenges this bill had to face in the Parliament, etc. Please refer to the video on Private Members Bill for more details of the challenges regarding this bill. Now, this Private Members Bill was introduced in the Rajya Sabha and it has been passed by the Rajya Sabha. Now what will happen? It has to go to the Lok Sabha. Lok Sabha has to pass it. Then the President has to give his assent. But in between what happened? The Supreme Court struck down the Section 377 of the IPC. Now the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Bill also aimed at striking down Section 377 of the IPC. Now in between this has been struck down by the Supreme Court. And besides the Parliament, there are a number of activists who are working at grassroots levels for the welfare of the community, like NGOs, think tanks, civil society, etc. We have seen various measures to protect the rights of the transgenders, but we have also seen there are various challenges in implementing these schemes or measures. So what has to be done? A special attention from the society at large has to be given to this community. It is not only the state machinery or the judiciary that has to take proactive steps in this manner, but the society at large is responsible to protect the rights of the transgenders. So the attitude of the society towards the transgenders should change. And there is also a need to adopt a multi-pronged approach in order to solve the issues of the transgenders. For example, mass awareness campaigns must be given. There must be avenues for dignified employment opportunities for this transgender community, and there should be gender sensitization and affirmative action by the state. So this multi-pronged approach is essential to complement the efforts of the Election Commission, judiciary, and also the Parliament or the government in ensuring a meaningful and inclusive democracy for the transgender community. You can find the PDF of this lecture on my Facebook page, and for any queries related to your UPSC preparations, you can get in touch with me on my Facebook page, or you can email me at joyce.studiiq@gmail.com. Thank you.